But first of all, it is an honor for me to bring up here our keynote speaker, Ruth Messinger. For those of you who are New Yorkers, Ruth was a borough president, Manhattan borough president. She has been fighting for social justice for how many decades, Ruth? 8 decades. 8 decades. When we were trying to think of who we could bring in as a keynote speaker, and I think it was Glenn who said, you got to bring in Ruth. Ruth is a legend. She is tireless. I told her that when I grow up, I want to be just like her. She is currently the global ambassador of the American Jewish World Service, and she has fought her entire life on behalf of people who are invisible. And she hasn't stopped, because when I connected, as the refugees were filing into New York City, who was in Port Authority? Ruth. Trying to get coats, trying to get clothing, trying to get those refugees a place to live and to feel that they were home. Ruth, please.
Good evening. Thank you, Naomi. I'm not going to go too far off script, but in case you think that the 8 decades was an exaggeration, the earliest story in my family, which is when I was about 8, my parents took us on a car trip to see Williamsburg, Virginia. And the first gas station that we stopped at south of the Mason-Dixon line, I got out of the car. This is according to my mom. And there was a sign, white fountain, colored fountain. And I said to my mom, what does that mean? And she said, get a drink, get in the car, and I'll explain it to you. And I said, no, I'm not leaving until you tell me right now. So the good news is I wasn't arrested then. But I inherit my commitment to social justice from my parents, particularly my mother, and from my maternal grandfather, whom I will reference briefly later on. But good evening to all of you. It's really an honor for me to be asked to speak with you, because I want to have a chance to congratulate you individually for the amazing work of your diverse organizations, some of which I know really well, and some of which I really only know because this booklet is extraordinary. And then with all of you, I want to congratulate Naomi and congratulate the Good People Fund for 17 years of recognizing the people who are doing good in the world, the people who are making the world go round, and finding ways to help them, as she said really eloquently, I think, with funds and with enhanced public attention. That said, like Naomi and some speakers downstairs, I need to note that we are meeting at a moment of great challenge, with political upheavals in both the United States and Israel, with a war in Israel that's more than a year old, issues that are likely or already have affected the work of every one of these organizations, because they are likely to affect and often to intensify the challenges of your program participants and beneficiaries. And when policies are set or lives are disrupted, we all know that it is the people on the edge, the marginalized people, who are hurt the most. And those are the people that this extraordinary collection of organizations are trying to help. In the United States, of course, the political news is fresh, and I dare say upsetting to many on both sides of the ocean. Yes, groan. Some of us, myself included, are still grieving what we lost on election day, grieving for this new challenge to our democracy, and grieving for what this may do to programs like those in this room and to United States-Israel relationships. We are, to some extent, in a state of despair. So let me say clearly that grieving is real, that we need a time to feel sad, to attend to ourselves, and to seek additional support. We all know that from the ritual of Shiva. And also, let me say that despair is not a strategy. That does not mean, let me be clear, that does not mean that we cannot despair. We can and we do. We can acknowledge that feeling to ourselves and to others. We can say out loud, this is just too overwhelming. If I read one more headline, I'm pulling all the covers over my head and staying there. But then, I think like most of the people in this room, we have to remember that that is not a strategy. That we need to move beyond that emotion to determine how we will respond, how we will organize, how we will fight for ourselves and for our organizations. And of course, under the aegis of the Good People Fund, how we will fight for those people who are most vulnerable to the negative actions that our governments will take. If that's a little heavy, think of it for a minute like the instructions on the airplane. You have to put your own mask on first so that you can then act to help the others around you who cannot do it on their own. So take care of yourselves. Given that, it did occur to me that at a time like this, even though I'd been invited to speak earlier, I should just say what you already know, which is that your work is that much more needed in hard times, that the Good People Fund and others will help you through to a better moment in our politics in our lives, but that I shouldn't be asking anything else of you. Sadly for you, that's not my style. So I do say that in a way, but I also say that this is a time when we need more from you. When we need you not only to do the amazing work you are already doing, but to be and become that much more effective advocates for change. What I'm talking about essentially is the continuum from service to advocacy. Some of you who have been in programs with me have heard this many, many times. Now, for some of you, I know that this continuum is already built into your work, and I see that in some of the program descriptions. Not mentioning names of organizations, but you already help the abused elderly, and you fight for their legal rights to avoid elder abuse. You provide direct care to prisoners in the New York City Rikers Island jail system, which is horrendous, and you lobby to end mass incarceration. You help Haredi women reclaim their voices, and you train them to enter the political arena and be themselves advocates for change. And since you're going to hear from Freddie later, you could not have a better model of somebody who understands the connection between service and advocacy than the work that Freddie has done at Unchanged at Last, helping people in great need because they had to escape terrifyingly bad and abusive marriages, and then figuring out that she couldn't help everybody, but she could work to change the law against child marriage in every one of the 50 states in the United States, and she's now up to number 13. So what I want to do tonight is to encourage this advocacy. That is not, please, that is not for each of you to just take on additional work, but it's for your organizations to be articulate about what needs to change, about how we can address the problems not only at the direct service level, but at the roots. How we can together build toward a society that has fewer of the challenges that you address every day. So again, advocacy is not for every organization, although as you gathered, I get a warm heart when I read it in any one of the descriptions. It's not for every organization all the time, but it is, and here I'm going to push you all a little bit, it is for each of us to have that perspective, to understand essentially what would need to change for us not to have to do this work. Okay, they all have lots of other things you could do in your lives, issue by issue. What would have to change for each of these organizations, each of your organizations here, to not have to do what you do? Because the law or policy or activism had moved ahead and the problem no longer had the dimensions that it now has. So what I'm going to commend to you is an acronym that I invented. The world has more than enough acronyms, but here's another one. The acronym is WHY, spelled WWWHY. So Y spelled with 3 W's, and I am sure that someone can come up with a Hebrew version of the same. Those first 3 W's stand for what, for why, for who. For an example, what is behind the lack of access to food for those programs in Israel and in America that are feeding hungry people? Why is the situation the way it is in terms of young girls being able to be married into situations that are not acceptable to them? And sometimes, although I know I'm touching tighter ground here, sometimes who is profiting from this inequity? So I want to just give you a couple of examples. I mentioned Frady's already. When I was the CEO of American Jewish World Service, commercial coming, which for those of you who don't know it, works to expand human rights and end poverty in the developing world, working with non-Jewish indigenous leaders for social change on behalf of the American Jewish community. And one of the trips that I made to Mexico, we were working with a farmer group that was doing extraordinary organizing work. And I went up to an older gentleman. When I say older, that means he was much older than me. And he really looked as if he'd been farming for 100 years. My Spanish is very limited. But I said to him, can you tell me, I said to him, are you a farmer? And he said, yes. And I asked him a question or two about what he grew. And then I said to him, can you tell me why you're here at this meeting? And he said in Spanish that even I could understand. He said, madam, when my neighbor steals my chickens, I know just what to do. When the government of Mexico steals my water, I know I need help. And for me, that's like just an example of over and over again what happens. Evie Litwack is not here tonight, but she's a beneficiary of the Good People Fund, and she's a member of my synagogue. She started helping people who were in prison and jail because she had herself been there. And she knew, sorry, New Yorkers, you don't want to hear this, but she knew that Rikers Island failed to provide people with hats, gloves, and scarves in a climate that is still quite cold. But while she was thinking about direct service and what does a person need who's coming out of prison and how might that individual be helped with a suitcase that had a laptop and a Metro card, she also said, out of her bedroom, with her only staff, I think still being about 1,020 interns, but we have to expose what's happening in the jail system. We have to expose how it's not conducive to helping anybody, how it's punitive. We have to end directly the systems in the United States of mass incarceration. And so again, as a kind of one-woman shop, she has managed to combine both direct service and advocacy against the prison and jail system. Okay, the third example comes from my own work today in a field in which many of you are fiercely engaged. And that is the work with immigrants, whether to Israel or to America, coming from countries where they experience oppression, assault, personal damage, people who are traveling many, many miles seeking freedom. In the case of people who are arriving in New York, whom we call, please New Yorkers help me with this, whom we call our newest New Yorkers. They have mostly traveled through 6 countries, been assaulted by crooks and by some so-called government officials, had their belongings stolen, and they've come here because they can't stay where they are. And the extraordinary news in this city, makes me very proud to be a New Yorker, is that there are many, many groups providing help, providing food, providing clothing, providing legal services, providing health referrals. Some of you are running those groups. Some of you are contributing to those groups. All I can say is thank you. Those people are our newest New Yorkers, and they need that help. But, step back, neither of our countries has a clear policy that encourages the welcoming of immigrants who are most often needed in our economies. For those of you who are New Yorkers, our construction industry, our health and hospitals and home care industry, and our food industry depend on New Yorkers. Depend on immigrant labor coming in. We will hurt ourselves directly if we do not adopt different policies. And then in New York City right now, also elsewhere in the United States, although some cities are doing better than New York, and probably also in Israel, there are affirmative government policies that disrupt the immigrant experience, that create unnecessary chaos for our newest arrivals. So we need, and we are in New York, organizing at those levels as well, challenging our local governments to be more welcoming, to make assimilation easier, to provide, given what I just said, English as a second language and job training, and entry into existing well-paid union-level jobs if we would just build the channels properly. So these are policies that would help both the newest New Yorkers, the newest arrivals, and help our societies. And to be honest with you, if those people on the front lines who are clothing people every day, who are cooking food for the Venezuelans, who are providing health information, if those people don't pick up that advocacy agenda, then nobody will. It's the people who are closest to the problem, the people who are delivering the services, like so many of you, who understand that the world needs to change, that there need to be lawsuits funded or policies changed or different people elected if we are going to have the kind of country that we want. And so that's a passion of mine. I would say a word about my background. So again, since many of you are New Yorkers, I am the granddaughter of a man who was born on the Lower East Side 145 years ago, as a graduate of City College, got a master's degree, we can never figure out where, became a teacher in the New York City public school system, became the principal, now we're going to get close to some of your backgrounds, listen carefully, became the principal of PS 20, the school on the Lower East Side where Harry Golden, Jake Javits, Eddie Cantor all attended. And here's the story. My grandfather went across the street from PS 20 every day on the Lower East Side to a storefront where he taught English to Yiddish-speaking parents in his school so that they would be able to have a step up. That's my inheritance, and he went on as an active member of every administrative and board position in the earliest days of Federation in New York. He went on to speak at a policy level for all the things that needed to change, including he was the treasurer who was raising money against the wishes of the US government for the people on the St. Louis. So I come by this work honestly. I have been doing it every decade of my life, but right now we are organizing again. This is the idea I wanted you to live with for both direct services and advocacy for immigrants. And that's the critical H. Now we got beyond who, what, and why. The H is how. How can this broader situation be addressed? In every one of the situations of every one of the grantees that the Good People Fund helps, maybe there's a law that needs to be passed. Maybe there's a government policy that needs to be changed. Maybe there's a legal case that needs to be brought. And no, you cannot take on this work yourselves. You cannot, each organization, also do all the root cause work. But you can think about collaborating with other groups that would profit from this change. You can think about urging a generous donor to continue their support to you and to also help advocate for a new government policy. And that's the simple letter Y in the acronym, 3 W's and H. Y just stands for yes. As in, yes, this is something else we might do. Because if, and I want to say not if, but when it works, it would change the situation, not only for the families or the farmers or the immigrants or the children that you help every day, but for many more families and farmers and immigrants and children than any of us can reach on our own. So that's the message. And now I want to share with you some thoughts from others that have inspired me and that I hope will inspire you as you continue to do your extraordinary work. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, a social justice leader in and for the Jewish community and the world, said, "In a free society where terrible wrongs exist, some are guilty, but all are responsible." So we are collectively not guilty for some of the worst abuses in our societies and communities. But we have, and you have, thank you, assumed responsibility for addressing some of those abuses. And I'm just asking that we all continue to hone in on that sense of responsibility and to work on both the micro and macro levels. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do." And for those of us who are waking up every morning with a new assault on our notion of government, that seemed like a useful quote, but perhaps the next one is most relevant to the current situation that we find ourselves in this country. It's from John Lewis, the late United States Congressman and civil rights leader, who is a personal hero of mine. Oh, and I'm going to interrupt myself. John Lewis, most people have an idea who he was. John Lewis said to every Jewish person or organization that ever came to lobby him in his congressional office, he would ascertain first, he would say, "You're Jewish?" They would say yes, and he would say, "My presence here is due to the fact that my mother attended a Rosenwald school." So for those of you who don't know, Julius Rosenwald was a very successful Jewish entrepreneur, one of the founders of Sears Roebuck and Company. And he took his profits and he traveled through the southern part of the United States, and every place that he could find a community where people would help in the construction of a one-room schoolhouse and agree to pay the teacher, he built a school. Julius Rosenwald built 5,000 schools, and John Lewis's mother attended one of them, and that helped make John Lewis who he is today. Anyway, here is what John Lewis said. This is for all of the people who are particularly suffering from the election. "We used to say that ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us in every generation must do our part. And if we believe in the change we seek, then it is easy to commit to doing all we can, because the responsibility is ours alone to build a better society in a more peaceful world." And then, of course, you know the teaching from our own texts. "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Your work, the work of the Good People Fund and its grantees, is all about hope." That's what it says here. Hope for ending hatred and war. Hope for building community across lines of difference. Hope for supporting and empowering people, women and young people, and our LGBTIA population. Hope for ending food insecurity and expanding access to quality health care. Hope for new lives for immigrants and formerly incarcerated people. Hope for a different and better world. So let me close with the words of the Chinese poet Lu Xun. "Hope is like a path in the countryside. Originally, there was no path. Yet as people are walking all the time in the same spot, a way appears. Keep walking, friends. Walk together. Take care of yourselves and build paths of hope. Fight together and remember that when we fight, we win." Thank you.